And then we called this a town hall because I want it to be a conversation. I want to take questions. I want to talk about issues that are important to you all. We were a little shy at first, or maybe we all kind of came to listen. So I'll kind of bring up issues and then just feel free to jump in as questions come up, and we'll see where the topics take us. For those of you that are new, my name is Andrea Sorce. I'm the candidate for mayor this November, and it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces and some new faces, so thank you all for coming. I am, first of all, not a politician. I had no desire to run for office in my life, but I love this city. I moved around a bunch and arrived in Vallejo and absolutely fell in love with this community for the reasons that many of you probably love Vallejo. And I was so frustrated by the lack of progress and the lack of transparency and the government just really not working for the people. And so in deciding to step in and run for office, it was really important for me to run on transparency and inclusion. Because I said, I have a public policy background and we'll talk about issues, but for me, this is also really a campaign about values. And it's about creating government that's more responsive to the people that it serves and is more inclusive. So I wanted to have a town hall where it's just me up here talking to folks, because this is how I'm going to lead as mayor. These are the types of things that I'm going to do as mayor out in the community in different parts of Vallejo, speaking with people. So that's sort of why this is really important to me, and hopefully will be the first of many events like this. I am originally from North Carolina. I grew up there, went to the University of North Carolina, and then moved out to the Bay Area after college. I started out in K-12 education, went and moved to Oakland and taught and worked at a Boys and Girls Club in Oakland in the East Bay, and then served in the Peace Corps, which is where I met my husband Slater. And today is Independence Day for Central American countries, so it's a very special day as well for all of my friends there. And it was an incredible experience. We worked with small businesses, microenterprise, microfinance cooperatives, agricultural producers in Honduras and El Salvador. And then after getting out, I managed some nonprofit programs. I managed after-school programming in San Jose, and then I managed economic empowerment programming for refugees and immigrants down in San Diego for a little bit. We helped folks start up small businesses. We actually ran a lending fund that helped finance their small businesses. We helped people with tax preparation. We helped people with financial literacy. We helped people build credit as they were arriving into the U.S., and I was responsible for all that grant writing and grants management and managing my staff. And then upon arriving in Vallejo, we decided to plant here, buy our house here, and I got very, very lucky. I got a job teaching at Diablo Valley College. I had gotten my master's in public administration at a public policy school, and it was a very economics heavy program, and I got a job teaching economics at Diablo Valley College. Started out as an adjunct, got onto the tenure track, and just got tenure earlier this year. So that is currently my day job, is as an economics professor, which is another reason why I wanted to do this format. Because as an educator, I like this format more than being up on a dais with everybody else. So I'll probably sit and have it feel a little bit more like a community conversation today. And I want to open up, if you have questions about any of my background or experiences or what brought me here, we can talk about that as well. Getting involved in Vallejo, I originally started volunteering with asylum seekers from Central America. My heart is in that part of the world and working with folks coming from that part of the world. And in working with asylum seekers from Central America and working with refugees, there's a lot of trauma that people have been through. There's a lot of people that have been through, there's a lot of violence and assault and things like that. And so I completed the state certification in domestic violence and sexual assault counselor training and started doing that volunteer work in the community here. Did some volunteering on the domestic violence hotline, learned a lot about human trafficking down Sonoma Boulevard. And then in about 2020, 2021, I met a friend named Chris Kelly, whose brother unfortunately had been killed by Vallejo police back in 2012. And most of you are familiar with the history of our police department here. She was trying to get attention on Vallejo into police reform, and so I joined up with her and a group, and we started up the ACLU Solano County chapter. And I started getting more aware of issues in Vallejo. we were actively pushing for police accountability. We were pushing for humane response to homelessness. We were pushing for First Amendment protections when they were trying to censor public comment at city council meetings. And I was finding that there was so much energy and love and activism in this community, and the government wasn't really responding. One of our initiatives was to create a board called the Surveillance Advisory Board, which monitors the use of police surveillance technology and trying to keep people safe and making sure that privacy is protected when they do so. So I currently chair that board as well, and then have gotten involved in some other local Democratic hubs and volunteering. I met a lot of wonderful people through that work, and that was how I think the slow build started that led me to eventually run for office. So it was through meeting all those folks and being the one at city council meetings, trying to raise what I thought were really serious issues and try to represent the people, and not seeing the government really work for us. So landed where I am, running for mayor. It's the best decision I've ever made. We have so much momentum right now. People who really want change, they're not happy with the same sort of cadre of politicians that say one thing and then do another, and it's time we bring the government back to the people. So I've identified, that's the preamble I want to give, I've identified 5 priority areas that I'm concerned with, and we've put them in this, they're not in any particular order for a reason, except that this is the order they are on the website. So the first one, fiscal responsibility. You know, since I'm an economics professor, I think a lot about the budget, the fact that Vallejo's been through bankruptcy, and what we need to do to manage the budget. And for those of you that have been following, it's been largely smoke and mirrors for several years. We don't always know what's going on with the budget. We'll have money budgeted, for example, for police. We don't know where it's going, and no one seems to want anyone to look under the hood. So the first thing that I'm going to do is request an audit of our finances so we can figure out where we're at, what resources we have, is there waste we can cut, are there funds that are supposed to go one place but are going another. Can't make any major financial decisions really until we have an accurate assessment of our finances. And then that will allow us to address some of the other things which, you know, I was out canvassing this morning and I hear repeatedly from people that these things are the concern. Public safety, the understaffing and the lack of response, which is rooted, in my opinion, and I think at this point, in fact, is rooted in the history of misconduct and the reputation of the department. We can't recruit and retain good officers and keep people safe with the status of the department right now. So there's got to be a real concerted effort to reform and rebuild and get some more staffing so we can keep people safe. I hear a lot from folks about the stagnation and economic development, and you know, we always hear about how much potential Vallejo has, and you know, this P word that's so frustrating, and nothing ever happens, and everyone just, well, we have this wonderful waterfront, we have this amazing location, we have this amazing diverse community, why can't we get going on economic development? So that's another priority I have. And then the housing situation. We know we're in a housing crisis in the Bay Area. We know we need to build more housing. We know housing is not affordable. And then we see every day out in the community the homelessness crisis getting worse and worse and worse. And we've got a city that just hasn't done what it's needed to do to address it. So those are those sort of issue priorities that I have. And then the final one speaks to the values I was talking about earlier. Speaks to the need for transparency. I think the reason we're struggling in a lot of these other issues is because there's not accountability in government. There's not a sense of shared responsibility for our problems. There's not access, there's not inclusion. And so the open government piece is really my effort to leverage our community and bring the government back to work for the community. And so I think what I want to do is I want to work through the issues and just hear what questions people have. So I'm going to open it up and see, is there any particular topic that folks want to discuss?
Okay, I'll start.
Go for it.
Public safety.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people who paid attention over the years see that our police union seems to be adversarial with, and of course not having a real chief also says a lot. As we learned this week, you know, there was this committee to look at the candidates. with lack of representation of
Yeah.
African Americans, which kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
So digging down in there and going back up to really having a good leader in that role, talk about that, would you? Because I think so much can't happen until we get that nailed down.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a few different points in there. I think there's the police union, the Vallejo Police Officers Association, which is something we can talk about because as a member of a public sector union, a very proud member of a public sector union and a very vocal supporter of unions, I struggle even calling the VPOA a union. And the reason that I struggle calling the VPOA a union is because every member of the department, except for the chief, historically has always been a part of the VPOA. Only recently were there 2 more positions created, deputy chiefs, that are also not in the union. Only one of those is currently filled. So in the entire police department, the entire Vallejo Police Department, there's 2 individuals that aren't part of VPOA, the chief and the deputy chief. The captains are part of it, the lieutenants are part of it, and then the sergeants and below. The president is a lieutenant and the vice president is captain. The entire purpose of a union is for the workers to have the ability to collect a bargain against management. If management is in the union with the workers, to me that's not a union. You almost need a union within that union. And I've spoken with a lot of people to kind of the broader public safety question. I'm doing my homework on this because this is a really serious issue. And I think our past leaders have made poor decisions and deflected the problem long enough that now we're in a real crisis. And so I'm doing my homework and I'm speaking with my colleagues at DVC that teach administration of justice. I'm speaking with people in Vallejo that have experience in law enforcement, with former chiefs, with former officers. And I've heard a couple of different models that there are other departments that have sergeants and below is one union, and then management's another union. That could be a model. Getting some other ideas on how to combat that, because I think it's become clear that the VPOA has been one of the bigger obstructors of reform and has actively done things that have undermined public safety in Vallejo. I don't think that's a secret anymore, given how they treated the recruitment, when there were applications that they refused to process for officers and things like that. Some of the things that they've posted, encouraging officers to leave and things like that. I don't know that reflects the will of the broader number of officers in the department, but I think because of the hierarchical structure, they don't really have a say, and I that's difficult. That's a real obstruction, I think, to public safety. So the other piece was the history of misconduct and the need for a new chief, and that's the most important decision Vallejo is going to make for the next several years is this chief, because we need a chief that's going to be able to reform the department, have the respect of the officers, and have the respect of the community. And the previous chief, Shawnee Williams, was actively trying to reform the department, but wasn't supported. Didn't have the support and ended up getting pushed out in a way that really deeply disturbed me. He was the first black police chief Vallejo had ever had, and was pushed out in a manner that, to me, needed to be investigated, and could have been investigated perhaps for hate crime investigation level. Given the disproportionate impact of people of color, of police violence in Vallejo, given what happened to Vallejo's first black police chief getting pushed out, and given that we currently do not have any African Americans on the city council, the fact that there was no black community member on the hiring panel for the new chief, it's appalling. It really deeply disturbed me, and it doesn't matter if it would have changed the outcome or not changed the outcome, or they talked to other people during the process. If you want to try to rebuild trust and right wrong for a community, you have to do the work and include. And the fact that there was only even one representative on the panel who didn't show up, there should have been 2. There should have been a backup plan. There needed to have been more inclusion, and it undermines the entire process because, as I mentioned, one of the things we need in the chief is somebody who's going to have the respect of the community. And how can that person have the respect of the community if they were hired through a process that wasn't inclusive? So That's my answer on the chief. The chief is probably the most important decision we're going to make, and that process has already been bungled, and now you've lost that trust with the community, and you've done even more damage. So, yeah. Other questions on public safety? Go ahead, Sushana.
I'm wondering if we have any sense at all of what percentage of the budget of the police department is overtime. Because for years, there has been a pattern in some police departments where they do rotating sick outs. So I use my sick leave days so that you can get some overtime. You get sick, I get the overtime, and so my salary, in one case, the neighbor that I had in Vallejo who worked for the San Francisco Police Department was making 3 times his base salary because of the system of overtime rotation. And so it's in the interest, the financial interest, I would think, of some police folks to keep an understaffed department. Then you can grow your salary by doing overtime.
Yeah.
So is that going to be part, do we know those numbers now, or is that going to be part of the fiscal detective stuff that we're going to do?
And for the sake of I don't know what the live stream's picking up. For the sake of the live stream, the question was about overtime. What percentage of the police budget's going to overtime? And there's a little bit of a incentive, a disincentive almost for some officers for us to staff up because they can make so much more on overtime than they can with their base salary. And I think the answer is exactly what you said. It's going to have to come through the audit. There's been allegations of time card fraud. I mean, we need to audit a few things. But one thing I know for sure is that we currently have over $60 million budgeted for the police in Vallejo for 130 plus officers. We only have about 70. Of that, half of them are on patrol. If you do the math, and I've done the rough math, there should be $15+ million extra in that budget that isn't being used, that's salary savings. Only some of that's going to go to overtime because we're not getting the services. So we know that there's not as many folks on the streets as we're staffed for. So where's that extra money going? I think that gets to the audit piece. Is if you ask, I've asked the chief and the deputy chief, do you know where that money is going? They do not. And it is not going to the police department. So it's interesting when I speak with people, going door to door, one of the big misconceptions is they go, well, we need more budget. We need a more police budget. We actually have the budget to hire dozens and dozens more officers. The problem is the current reputation of the department, we can't recruit the officers we need, and there's been active obstruction of our ability to recruit because they weren't processing applications and things like that, and we don't know where the extra money is going. It certainly isn't going to public safety. So we have to look into that, and then we need to make sure that the new chief takes this seriously and doesn't let the incentive for just a few folks to get more overtime undermine all of our ability to be safe. Because the patrol officers, from ride-alongs I've gone on, the patrol officers want more staffing. They don't want to get all the overtime. They're working 12, sometimes 16-hour shifts, and they don't have backup. There's sometimes 3 or 4 of them on patrol. They want to staff up. So if there are people that don't, we need to hold those people accountable and ensure that we staff up. Yeah, go ahead.
Procedural question.
Yeah.
Is the mayor on her or his own able to call for that, for instance, without city council vote or?
My plan is yes. Because it's a service that's offered for free by the state controller's office. So I believe that I can request that as mayor. I would also get the council support because just to make sure we have that, I would get a majority of council support for that as well. Yeah, go ahead, Belinda.
Who's supposed to be looking at that budget? I mean, nobody's
Well,
counting.
the city manager, so this actually gets to one of the posts. Oh, more questions have popped up too. One of the, great, I love having questions. One of the questions is, what is the difference between mayor and city manager? So I'm gonna answer this and then answer your question, which is, I like to use the analogy of a CEO and a board of directors. The city manager, the system we have in Vallejo, the city manager really runs the day-to-day operations of the city. And that's actually a really good thing. For a city our size, it's better to have a professional managing the city that has the education and the experience to run a city government rather than somebody who's getting elected from any other profession. There's a lot of technical expertise needed to run a city. What we need is we need the council and the mayor to act as a board of directors, as a private company would have a board of directors overseeing a CEO. So the city manager is kind of the CEO doing the day-to-day operations. The board of directors, the council, is overseeing their management. So I think the issue in Vallejo is that there has not been that oversight. The city manager has all the power, and there hasn't been the check and balance from the board of directors. And we, the people, I like to think of us as the shareholders, we're the ones that are getting shortchanged, and we want our board to replace the CEO or hold the CEO accountable for their mismanagement. And that's where your question comes in. Who's responsible for looking at the budget? Well, the city manager is. The city manager hires the finance director, they build up the budget, they get it approved by city council. It hasn't been as transparent of recent as I would like to see. It's not been a transparent process at all. It's been very rushed. In theory, the city council sees that budget and they can give input. The other thing we have to do is you have to make sure what you budget for is actually what you spend. So you can have a nice budget, but does our budget match our spending? And for that, the city does its own audits. And that, if you have ethics and accountability and oversight, that system could work, but that has broken down in Vallejo. And I think the audits that the city has done are the base level, do the numbers add up, and not are we actually spending on what we said we were going to spend on. So the audit could be done by the city manager, and I would like for our new city manager to clean up the finances, but it can be led by city council and then give direction to the city manager to clean it up. Does that make sense? Or do you want to ask a follow-up?
Maybe we need an extra department there to help out or something.
It's really just about having the audit be external and not internal, I think is the big thing. Is if you have people that are moving money around, it's supposed to go one place and instead it goes another place, they don't want anyone else external looking under the hood, and so we need somebody external looking under the hood.
Will it be kind of an ongoing audit?
I think it depends. I mean, I think you want to have better transparent mechanisms for regular audits, and you want it to be available to the public. But I think to start doing one from the state, or the forensic audit that I'm talking about is the most detailed, where there's actually, if you want to jump in, Jasmine?
Actually, I want to add and ask a question. Mayor McConnell recently said that he has been asking for an internal auditor, and a lot of council members said they want an external audit, which
Yeah.
I think are necessary. When you're mayor, would you support us getting the findings from the external audit, making it a regular process, but also entertaining the idea of having an internal auditor who had very narrow reporting lines to council and mayor as well?
Yeah, I like that idea. So the question, again, just so everybody can hear, the question had to do with the current mayor being okay with internal audit, some of the other council members asking for external audit, and we need the external audit, but is there a way to do an internal audit and have it report directly to the mayor and council? I'm not sure in the charter with the reporting structure if that's possible, but I would like to explore at least something where the mayor and council can see the direct report and not have it filter through. I think is the main thing. I think there was somebody over here. Was there? Go ahead.
Yeah. How about some examples of what the city manager does besides that sort of overall sort of managing something?
Yeah.
And also, I just want to point out that the city manager is there for a long time, potentially, and city staff has been there for a long time. The mayor isn't there for very long. So it feels like, I don't know, they sort of all know the routine.
Yeah, the question is the mayor and city council members typically turn over more often and the staff stay there. It depends. Vallejo has a history of cycling through city managers pretty rapidly, especially coming out of bankruptcy and then even recently. So we've actually had some council members that have been on council and had 4 or 5 city managers since they've been there. But the continuity, the ability to do the day-to-day tasks, yeah, that is the staff that are here for hopefully decades at a time. You want to retain your staff so you retain that know-how.
Even if they don't live here?
Well, I mean, so the question was even if they don't live here. I actually had a conversation on OzCat about this because you can't require staff to live in the city, and it's not necessarily what we want all the time because you want people to be able to take jobs in that profession and advance their careers where jobs are available, and there's not always a job available in the city you live in. So the example I give is I teach in Contra Costa County because there wasn't a job available at DVC in economics when I was applying, and there wasn't a job at Solano College. So I work in a different county than I live in just because that's where the job was. So we don't want to exclude those people. We want to have flexibility, but I think what we need to do is we need to recruit more heavily in Vallejo and really look at our local talent, look at our local high schools, look at our community college, and try to recruit people that are from this community to work for the city and provide them opportunities to advance within the city so that we can have more locals working for the city. And we can get talent if there's people that live other places but want to come here for a certain opportunity, they can do so as well. Yeah. Go ahead, Bobby.
My concern actually is the power the city manager has to make decisions to spend buku money. He has that power.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out how to explain this. Like,
Yeah, the city manager.
They make all these deals.
Yeah.
On their own.
Yeah.
And why isn't that stopped? I mean, why can't the city council set a limit like you are authorized to spend $50,000, the rest has to go before
Yeah.
the city council?
That's exactly what can happen. And so the question was about what the city manager having authorization to spend a certain amount of money. And you see it sometimes if you look on the consent calendar on city council agendas, you'll see there'll be some spending cap for a consultant contract. It'll be, $100,000, let's say. And you'll see 10 consulting contracts on the closed session agenda, all for $100,000 or less. You'll see stuff like that, and that is on the city council. That's on the mayor and city council to not allow that, to call that out. And you actually can, if there is a bankruptcy or a mismanagement or an incident, you can clamp down that spending authority. It has pros and cons because there are certain things that need to get spent, decisions that the city manager can make, contracts that need to get executed, that you don't necessarily want every single one of those going before city council. It starts to get onerous for city council. Our meetings already go long enough, they're already overwhelmed. But if you're trying to rebuild trust and get finances in order, you might want to clamp down and lower that number and have things come out more transparently until there's a better system and there's more trust. So I would be in favor of that. I would be in favor of lowering the city manager's spending authority temporarily just for the sole purpose of transparency. Just for the sole purpose because there has been so much waste of recent, just to rebuild that trust and get that all out in front of the public. And hopefully too, not have a city council that just rubber stamps all the spending, but actually ask the question of, why are we spending the money here? Why is this if it's a contract, why is this a no bid contract? Why did this not come before us, earlier? Things like that. Ask the right questions. I see Michelle, go ahead.
Yes, on that same topic, I think part of the problem in me watching the meetings is that a lot of people on council don't have the knowledge to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you do is one of the things that's great. But as an educator, wouldn't it make sense to either have someone specifically to advise the council, someone who's not the city manager, who can educate them and answer these questions?
Yeah.
So, because there's got to be some way to accelerate their learning so they can make informed, good policy decisions. And right now, and I understand why they rubber
question is, the council members sometimes don't know the questions to ask. And if the staff are presenting them something, and the staff are experts in that field, they often don't know when to push back.
Intimidating.
Yeah, and I think that's been a problem that we've had in the past few years. And I think it's a couple different things. I think it's important to have at least a couple people on city council that have backgrounds in public policy and local government. So in addition to myself, we'll have Tanya Letiju in District 3, who runs the San Francisco Housing Authority, who knows government like the back of her hand. So we're going to see a very different culture on city council starting in January, because we're going to have people that have the expertise in those areas. And then I think there's also an element of, I think we might want to explore offering a staff member to city council. So one of the questions I usually get is, well, why not make city council full-time? So that they have more time to look through the agendas and look through things that are going on. I don't know if that's what we want for a city this size, but what might be helpful is to have a staff member advising city council, somebody that has policy expertise, that can look through things and check things and help. In the interim, that's sort of coming from the community, and we have a lot of people in the community that have these areas of expertise and that do call out things. And the problem is that there's not been a responsiveness from city council and a receptiveness to that feedback. So you'll have members of the community like myself. I'll give the example. When I spoke out against the North Mare Island deal, I was an economics professor, said I'm putting my economics professor hat on. The city council was about to vote to sell North Mare Island for $3 million. And I went up there and said, with my expertise in economics, I will tell you factually that it is more profitable for a developer to sit on this land and let it appreciate than it is for them to invest and develop the land. If you pass this deal as is, that is what is probably going to happen. And I know this because this is my area of expertise. And I gave them that information, and I had emailed them and given this, and then they went and they voted for it anyway. So I think, to your question, Michelle, we also need council members. We need two things to change. We need council members to be more confident in asking questions and hopefully have a little more expertise in the areas that they're working in. But we also need council members that will take advice from community members when community members are experts. Because we have community members that have expertise in public safety, that have expertise in housing, that have expertise in economic development, and the city council members don't take the input. They don't listen to them, and they're not responsive to them, and so that's another part of the culture that needs to change.
So I think that's really important, but again, if you're paid, $12,000 or $13,000 a year, and let's say we want the council to act optimally for the benefit of the city and the people who live here, that means we want them to be able to make the best decisions, and that means they need information fairly quickly. So even though if there's anyone in favor of public participation, it's me, it's my thing, but if you need something done in a timely fashion, you need subject matter experts that you have on call.
And in theory, so the question was, the council members really should have subject matter experts on call. In theory, that's the staff. In theory, that's the city staff, and that actually brings me to another point. The city council, as the board of directors, manages the CEO. There needs to be performance management at all levels of the government in Vallejo. That's something that hasn't been happening for several years now. One of the ways that we can combat the disconnect is by giving city council some support with the performance review of the city manager and the city attorney, by bringing in experts in HR and management to conduct the performance reviews of the city manager and the city attorney and evaluate objectively, are they meeting the requirements of their job? Are they delivering what they need to deliver? Do full evaluation of the staff and their perception of the city manager and the city attorney, and have the experts help with the performance review. So if city council has blind spots to not be able to evaluate, for example, whether a city attorney is performing, let's bring in someone that has been a city attorney or has managed city attorneys or has evaluated city attorneys and have them help with that process. And then that helps ensure that you have competent staff at the top, and then those people can do the performance management with their staff, so that, in a perfect world, the expert in finance in the city of Vallejo is the finance director. The expert in economic development is the economic development director. That's where we want to be. That's the goal, right? Is we want to be able to trust the people that we're paying our tax dollars to do this work. And the way to do that is to start the performance management up top. Yeah. Go ahead, Susanna.
Do we know in the budget, what percent of our operating budget is from taxes and fees?
Mhm.
And what percent is from grants and other funding?
So the question's the composition of the budget, taxes versus other funding sources. We do know, I'm not going to know off the top of my head, but when the budget is presented it should be earlier, but it's usually in May or June that it's presented, there is usually a breakdown of where the revenue sources are coming from and then where the money's going. My understanding is the majority of it is taxes. I don't think the grant funding is as big of a chunk.
Well, John Garamenti just sent out his beautifully color coordinated newsletter, and there are $13 million for infrastructure, and it's Pittsburgh, it's here, it's there, nothing for Vallejo.
Yeah.
And we, I've said this in other meetings, we need really good grant writers for the city, because if we are having trouble with our own revenue stream, then we want to be able to use the Recovery Act to do our infrastructure, whatever. And this is a place where I get really critical of the staff, because more than once there have been missteps that have directly affected cost overruns and other problems with the budget, because staff either didn't do a proper filing of the grant, or they expected one but then it didn't arrive, and why are those staff still in those positions? Because to me, that is a real benchmark right there.
Well, performance, that's the performance management piece that I was just talking about. If there's two separate issues, and I'm really glad you brought this up, so the questions about grants, and we need people getting more grants because we're leaving money on the table. Other cities are getting funding when Vallejo isn't, and we're also mismanaging grants, and there's no accountability. It's two separate issues, and it's something that I talk about often because I also feel strongly about it. The job of the mayor, yes, the mayor is one vote on city council, but one of the jobs of the mayor is to be the voice of Vallejo externally. And one of the things that I will do that I don't think our previous mayors have done enough of is advocate for Vallejo with our county, state, and federal representatives. There is money on the table, and it's interesting because I've been bringing up the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the climate change bill, and as examples of I can't imagine that there wasn't funding that could have come to Vallejo out of those bills, or more funding that could have come to Vallejo in the infrastructure bill for, our roads or our police station, our two big infrastructure needs, and in the climate change bill, something for our seawall, to reinforce our seawall and make us more resilient to sea level rise. And that comes from relationship with the congressman's office. The project that I manage at DVC, I manage a project to reduce textbook costs for students. We got $1 million of congressional appropriation through building a relationship with a congressman. So we ended up doing a grant, writing a grant, and receiving it, but the opportunity became available because of those conversations. That can be something that the mayor does. And I'm not sure if Vallejo is getting shortchanged from federal, state, and county funds because Vallejo isn't asking, or because Vallejo isn't asking in the right way. I don't know if Vallejo sought infrastructure funds. And it's interesting for anybody that's in United Democrats that was at our meeting most recently with the congressman. He actually brought up the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and said, I want to bring more resources to Vallejo. So it sounds to me like there's still money available in those bills that we could potentially bring here with the right leadership. But that brings me to the second point. What we don't want to have happen is we don't want to bring grant funding to Vallejo and have it get mismanaged. And that has happened too many times for us to make that mistake again. The Sacramento Street housing project, $2.5 million had to get paid back to HUD, Housing and Urban Development, because of mismanagement of that project. And to your point, no one was held accountable. We never figured out what happened or why. It's not even necessarily somebody needs to get fired. Accountability doesn't mean punitive. It just means, can we identify what went wrong and make sure it never happens again? And instead of doing that, even though you could probably go back and find my public comments, because I was up in front of council at the podium saying, you need to audit this project and figure out what happened, why we paid back $2.5 million to HUD. Instead, we went ahead with the Broadway project with a state grant, and the same people are managing that grant that managed the previous grant. So whatever they did wrong with the previous grant, that hasn't been corrected, and go figure, the Broadway project now is also way over budget, way over timeline, and has a huge funding gap, and I'm not sure that we're not going to end up having to pay money back to the state, because we're on a tight timeline to meet the requirements, and it's terrifying. So I want to make sure we have mechanisms in place so that we can actually use grant funding properly and not get ourselves into trouble. So we need to bring the funding in, and then we also need the accountability for the management of the funds. And you got to do both at the same time. We don't have time to waste at this point. Yeah.
Just kind of on that point too, I remember one of your other meet and greets that I was at, you mentioned another good example that the state of California, Gavin Newsom, allocated tens of millions of dollars to be distributed to county and local governments to tackle retail crime and help our small businesses. And it turned out that there were multiple other cities in Solano County, Vacaville, Fairfield, Dixon, that applied for these grant funds and were given millions of dollars by the state, and it came out that Vallejo hadn't even been aware of, nor had they applied for these grants. And so you mentioned a little bit about that too, and I'd like to hear about that connective tissue between state, county, and local.
I think so, and I think it's like the example I mentioned with it's Congressman DeSaulnier that represents part of Contra Costa County where I teach. It was the relationship with the congressman's office that unlocked those funds for us, and then we applied and received it. The relationships need to be better at the county, state, and federal level. And when you have programs like the state funding for retail theft or Project Home Key, which is the one that the city of Vallejo bungled, we could have done some really good things with Project Home Key if we had handled it better. Those opportunities, to me, the alert for those opportunities should come through relationships with our state representatives. And I'm really excited to work with Christopher Cabaldon, who's going to be our incoming state senator, and just has such an incredible policy knowledge. It's going to be hugely advantageous for us to have somebody from West Sacramento representing us in Sacramento, because he's going to know Sacramento, and he's got a policy background. Building that relationship with his office, he can alert us when these funds are becoming available, when these bills are even in deliberation. He can say, hey, keep an eye out for this, for this opportunity down the road. And same thing with the county. Cassandra James, who is just going to be a gift to Vallejo starting in January. One of her campaign points was getting Vallejo its fair share. And she and I'm so glad to have her support in this campaign, and she and I are really looking forward to working together to get Vallejo its fair share and ensure that Vallejo uses the fair share wisely. It's that two-pronged, right? That two pieces of the puzzle is we need people at the county that can advocate for us and allocate the resources here, and then we need people in the city government that can ensure that when those resources come here, they get utilized. That makes me think of another example, which is the COVID relief funds. This is something that I talk about often. I'm running against somebody who was on city council when COVID hit, who says that, COVID is the reason why everything was fine, and then COVID hit, and then our budget went under. It's actually not what happened. The city of Vallejo got $26 million, over $26 million in COVID relief funds from the American Rescue Plan that were supposed to go to balancing the budget and providing continuity of public services. And the city council at the time and the staff at the time spent it all on things that most of which didn't come back to us. We don't really see the fruits of that. Some of it went to the housing project that I mentioned that went over budget. Some of it went to a no-bid consulting contract for somebody to do a strategic plan for economic development. It went various places, and none of it went back to essential workers. None of it went back to small businesses. None of it went into the roads. And so I think the reason I brought that up was just that's where Cassandra and I, that partnership is so important, because Cassandra can bring in resources from the county, but if they do with it what they did with the COVID relief funds, then it's not going to improve our quality of life at all. And so that's where you need both. You need the champions at the higher levels bringing resources here, and then you need the champions at the local level fighting to make sure those resources are used wisely. Yeah. Go ahead,
How
Robin.
did they justify, Dan, I was just talking, how did the city justify out of that COVID relief?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's where those go, $3,000 bonuses to city
Yeah.
staff, who are already still getting
Yeah.
paid, would they not?
It
Were they
was-
not getting
it
the
was-
regular salary?
Yeah, so the COVID relief, yeah, I forgot when I was listing it off. Yeah, one of the places the COVID relief funding went was bonuses to staff. And, again, COVID relief funds were supposed to go to essential workers. I would have had no problem with those funds going to our on-the-ground essential workers, especially folks like our dispatchers who have been historically underpaid, and our folks that are out there in, public works and people doing the work. But it went blanketly to every single staff member all the way up to the top, and it was framed as a retention bonus last fall, and all the staff had to do to get the retention bonus was be employed before Thanksgiving and be employed after Thanksgiving, and then they got the bonus. So I think there were about 8 work days. It was a 2-week period that included Thanksgiving. They just had to make it 8 work days, and then they, boom, got their $3,000 retention bonus. Or $1,500, I forget exactly what it was, but I think it was $3,000 retention bonus. That's not a retention. I mean, that's the if that was a retention bonus, it was a really poorly designed retention bonus. And sure enough, a bunch of staff quit in December and January of that year. Those types of decisions. I mean, the way that the COVID relief funds were spent, my impression was that the city manager at the time and the senior staff at the time they came up with where they wanted to go, they presented it, and city council rubber stamped it, and there was never really any discussion. And what really upset me, and we're getting into why I decided to run for office, what really upset me during that process was that at the same time they were doing that, literally at the same time that they were doing that, they were asking us to raise our own taxes to fix the streets and to have public safety, which is, as a taxpayer, offensive. To have people out there wasting $26 million that's coming in and saying, if you want to not have your car hit a pothole and if you want to have police response, here you need to raise your own taxes. Maybe we did need to raise our own taxes, but I don't appreciate getting asked to raise my taxes when there's people wasting money that we already have. So that's, yeah, it's frustrating. Other questions? Go ahead.
Thanks for coming here today.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. I'm an economics professor, right? We have low-income housing concentrations
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
other parts of the city. Sorry I got here late. I hope some of you didn't already know this, but the homeless issue here now, how does having the homeless population and the low-income housing affect our overall health in the city?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand
The question,
how
yeah.
it works.
We're
Because,
streaming.
And I want to preface by saying, there's some of our council who are interested in supporting all the nonprofits that support the homeless and bringing in more low-income housing. And it's like, how do we get out of our hole
for streaming. The question is about the concentration of low-income housing and the response to homelessness and kind of how we get out of the mess we're in. And one of the things we were just talking about was the lack of accountability with the mismanagement of existing funds, and then the lack of accountability when things go wrong. And there are two, I think, intersecting examples of mismanagement that impact this situation. The first example of mismanagement is the money that has gone into homelessness response, that has gone into housing projects like the Broadway project and Sack Street, which are the projects where we mismanaged grants and had to pay money back to the feds and the state. And had that money been put into real data-driven, proven solutions and managed correctly, I think we would be in a much better position than we are. So tens of millions of taxpayer dollars have been put into homelessness response, and it hasn't gotten us anything because it's been mismanaged. The other thing that's been mismanaged is the city's housing element has gone through, I think, 2 or 3 drafts now and wasn't submitted on time, wasn't approved by the state. I think one of the problems was it had all the low-income housing concentrated in one place. That was one of the reasons why that our housing element was rejected. And we absolutely need to spread it out. We have to build housing of all levels. I mean, we need all types of housing, and it has to be dispersed around the city. The current situation, we do have, especially right downtown, quite a bit already of low-income housing. We need to get some market rate housing down there, and we need to spread out market rate low-income housing throughout the city so that so we don't end up with concentration, and everyone has an opportunity to thrive and have retail and grocery and services where they are in the city. So I'm frustrated. I share your frustration because I think there hasn't been, the work hasn't been done to create the plan to get us out of the situation we're in. And there needs to be some more accountability.
I guess I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
Vallejo has been in a slump since
Yeah.
a long time ago. And the fact that we're pouring money into low-income housing and the homeless doesn't indicate to me that we're going to be moving in the right direction. And it's like, I'm not even talking about our district here. It's like, don't we have to invest our money in different things to rise up out of this poverty culture? It's like, I don't know.
I don't think that there's,
I mean, does the city benefit from having low-income housing? Or, I mean, how do the residents outside of the housing benefit from that situation?
yes. So we benefit from having all types of housing because we want people to be able to afford to live here, and we want people that work here to be able to afford to live here. But I think my answer would be it's not, I don't see it as an either or. I think the bigger problem is that the city is spending taxpayer money on things that are not delivering any meaningful results to our community. And I believe that if we were to spend that money on things that actually had an impact, actually had evidence to back them up, such as a safe camping or parking zone, which has worked in other cities and been a very reasonable and cost-effective response to homelessness, we would be in a much better position. And then we have the issues up here, they all intersect. So once you start having a more effective response to homelessness, now you're able to activate parts of downtown, hopefully, and get economic development. Well, that increases our tax base. That allows us to bring in more revenue to provide more services to people, and we get out of the vicious cycle and we get into the virtuous cycle. But for me, the first step is you've got to get the oversight and the management of what we're currently doing and kind of stop making those bad decisions. Because you mentioned, I think, the rut we're in. For me, the rut is coming from the mismanagement and the lack of accountability, and the vision that I have to get us out of it is making evidence-based decisions, knowing our city, making the right decisions for our city in this time with the population that we have. I see like 3 hands. Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, okay, so one of the things that I brought up that idea with other people before of basically having a campground where you would bring in, plumbing, showers,
Yeah.
washing machines, social services, and everybody keeps saying, well, you can't do that, the liability would be too great.
Yeah.
What is standing?
What is standing in my frustration with how the city has handled the issue. So Diane was mentioning how one of the things we could do is the safe camping parking zone. This city attorney's office specifically, but our city staff and our city leadership, despite council members having brought this up and requested it, our city leadership has said, basically just outright said, no, we're not going to do this because of the liability. Thing is, it's been done in other cities and worked. It was done in Martinez, it was done in Novato, I believe it was done in Fairfield, it was done in Santa Rosa, and it worked, and there's evidence and track record of these other cities implementing it that we could learn from. So I think the first step is not taking no for an answer and saying, we need to do this. How do we do this? Instead of, can we do this? No. Okay, let's just keep everything as is, which is what we're currently dealing with. The current system is exactly what you said. When the city sweeps, until people have somewhere to go, does Supreme Court decision, no Supreme Court decision, doesn't matter. Until people have somewhere to go, if the city comes in and sweeps an encampment, folks are just going to end up somewhere else, and we've seen it play out in the last few months. When the governor ordered, let's sweep all the encampments, and the city of Vallejo went and swept an encampment in South Vallejo, and all the RVs moved to River Park, and then they swept River Park, and everybody moved down to the library, and they swept Sereno Drive, and everybody ended up downtown. Until there is somewhere for folks to go, that the folks that are genuinely trying to get on their feet, we're never going to get out of the situation. We're only going to make it worse, and we're only going to waste city resources in the process. So the safe camping parking, it takes care of so many of the issues, because the big issue is sanitation. You give porta potties and dumpsters and make that available in mobile showers. One of the big issues too is people can't, a lot of folks are employed. I think 40%, the most recent study was about 40% of unhoused are employed. In order to be able to go to work, they need somewhere to put their stuff where it can't be stolen. So you get some lockers or something like that, or have a safe area where they can leave their stuff. Now they can be empowered to go and work. If they have an RV, they can lock it and trust that it's not going to get towed, and they're not going to have to deal with that. I speak with people a lot about the comorbidity with mental health issues and drug addiction and being unhoused, because just the stress of that situation leads people to be susceptible to drug abuse and worsening mental health crises. And a lot of times people have medication, and then their medication gets thrown away in the sweep. So giving them somewhere to safely put their medication, all that can be solved through the safe camping zone. And then what's nice about that too is when I've been at encampments, you hear the same things that where the residents that are near the encampments, whether it's Vallejo Heights or Lotus Lakeside or in St. Vinny's, the concerns that they have are fires, squatters, crime, dumping, all these things. If you talk to the unhoused in these areas, they say the same things. They say, we're victims of crime, we're victims of arson, we're worried about all these same things. This allows us to relocate those people somewhere where they can be safe, and then if there are folks on the street that are a danger to themselves and society, we can address that separately, because the encampments they attract arson, they attract illegal dumping, they attract crime, and it's not fair to anybody. It's like you said, it's not fair to anybody. But if you create a zone where folks can go, it eliminates that completely. Go ahead.
Well, it's a great, thanks for bringing it up, but the other, I know you. It all connects back to what you were saying before about the relationships with our county supervisors and our state reps and our federal reps to be able to drive resources here. We mentioned how Vallejo missed out on the retail theft program.
Yeah.
Brought millions of dollars here. But again, like on the camping issue, I think you mentioned before, or somebody mentioned that San Rafael, for example, is expanding a pilot program for a safe camping space that was so successful it was bringing 60 or 70% of the people who were living in the encampment out of the encampment and into permanent housing. So it's not just treating the problem and containing it somewhere. You're actually working towards getting these people into stable permanent housing.
Exactly.
Which reduces the overall number of people who are living on the streets or in the
during the state Senate race earlier this year, Jackie Elward, who was a candidate for state Senate, in Rohnert Park had done something very much like that, where they just took a grassroots approach and just reduced the number. They addressed homelessness by getting, the easiest cases first, helping people get into housing, and they reduced, I think they not the same situation Vallejo's in, but they reduced it from something like 100 to the single digits in her first couple years on city council there, because they took that proactive approach of really trying to transition folks. Because often you'll meet people who, it was one medical emergency, or their house got red tagged and they had to leave, but there are folks that are employed and genuinely could, just with a little bit. There was a statewide study published in Cal Matters that for a lot of folks, just $300 a month is the difference between them getting, being on the street or getting into housing. And you think about, the Broadway project, taxpayers in Vallejo are spending $700,000 a unit for these studio apartments. And if it's $300 a month to get folks off the street, you've got to just think about where are we spending our money and where's the best return on our investment. There are things that have worked in other cities that we can deploy.
Well, just to finish the point I was making is that a lot of times we hear the argument that, the solutions are too expensive, or where we've already got a tight budget here, so where are we going to get the funds from? And the San Rafael and the other examples that you used, it was because of those relationships and those connections between the local leaders and the county and state and federal that they were able to drive funds to actually pay for those projects. So they didn't come out of the general fund. So it creates this sort of opportunity cost of okay, we allocate X amount of millions to this, but that means we've got to cut the police budget. You can have San Rafael is using $2.5 million of state grant money to expand their state camping center. So
it's there for us, and it helps that we have an incoming county supervisor representing Vallejo who knows housing. Her expertise, Cassandra James's expertise, is in housing. She worked for the housing department in San Francisco. This is her bread and butter, and because she lives in Vallejo and is invested in Vallejo, she's going to be at the county in Fairfield getting the votes to bring resources to Vallejo, and then I'll be here with Tanya and the other council members making sure that we direct it to the things that are going to actually have an impact on the ground. And I think it's going to feel, again, we're not going to be able to fix everything overnight, but I think it's going to feel very different. It's going to feel very, very different come January. The way we're doing business in the city of Vallejo is going to change substantially. I saw a hand here, and then I'm going to go over to Steve. Or did you still have a question? In your city, or at least your county initially, which is helpful when we're thinking about allocating Solano County dollars. We want it to go to Solano County people. I think the other piece that's really important is we need leaders who, Solano County just always gets we always get the short end of the stick in the Bay Area. We're one of the 9 Bay Area counties. We're not treated like one in a lot of cases. You'll see even nonprofits, foundations, you'll see them do work in the 8 Bay Area counties and sometimes Sacramento, and they'll skip over Solano. Or you'll see resources pour into other counties and skip over Solano, and I think we need to step up and really start advocating for this county and for the city. And that's something that I'll do at every regional board that I'm a part of as mayor, with our state senator, who I think is really going to be a great advocate for Vallejo, with our congressmen, making sure that they really understand the urgency and the issues and the need here, and that they can help us direct resources here so that we don't get steamrolled at the state. The policies that come through the state typically benefit San Francisco and LA and especially housing policy. It's typically designed for big cities. Sometimes it doesn't really help us, or it'll be something that is blocked because of certain interest in Marin or Lafayette or these little bedroom communities. And Vallejo isn't either one of those things. We're kind of in the middle, and so we need somebody advocating for our specific situation and our interest, and really trying to drive resources here. The Highway 37 toll, I know I'm switching subject a little bit, but the Highway 37 toll is a great example. So not only are they going to put a toll on Highway 37, it looks like, I'm going to fight against it, but it looks like they're going to put the toll. They're going to put the toll at our end of 37. So 37 hits Vallejo, and then it goes through Sonoma County, and then it goes to Marin. It ends in Marin County. The toll booth will be on our end. So anyone in Solano County that uses 37 is going to pay the toll. People that in Marin that use 37 only pay the toll if they come all the way to Vallejo. If they go from Marin to Sonoma or Sonoma to Marin, they're not going to pay the toll. We're going to just have the booth over here. Well, this is going through the state legislature right now. Guess where the pro tem of the state senate represents? Sonoma and Marin. So that's where we call Christopher Cabaldon and we go, Chris, fight for us. And we try to, build up that advocacy so that our interests are represented on equal playing field with some of these other places. I think that kind of answers your question. I don't know if you have a follow-up. Yeah, I had Steve and then Diane.
Why isn't Vallejo declared a state of emergency for the homeless population?
Why? Oh.
Especially when you know that homeless are being brought from other cities. Even San Francisco gives them a boat ticket to come to Vallejo.
So the question is, why hasn't Vallejo declared a state of emergency? So the state of emergency declaration, the one we currently have for public safety, the point of those types of declarations is it usually gives the people in charge power to do things that they wouldn't normally be allowed to do, but that are needed to address the crisis. The public safety emergency, I think, was a little bit mishandled in that they declared the state of emergency but didn't really have a good plan on what they were going to do or how they were going to get out of it. But it's kind of like natural disasters. You declare the state of emergency so that you unlock resources or you get more, quicker decision making to be able to make fast decisions to address a crisis as it's occurring. I don't know with respect to homelessness if there would be an advantage to doing that, if there's some, if there's even precedent to do that. And I would also, I think one of the things we're missing in Vallejo is we actually don't know our population very well. You mentioned people getting bussed in or brought in from San Francisco. Again, what I was saying before, the data is showing that the majority of folks are from the counties that they end up in. San Francisco does have a program where they send people where they have family or where they have resources, but I think it was in the single digits, the number of tickets they actually purchase people to go other places in California. So I think it's a matter of doing the hard work and actually getting to know our own population. When we do the point in time count, actually getting data on why people aren't housed, what their situation is, where they came from, how they ended up here, and what they need to get out of their situation. We don't have any of that data. And so it's hard because there's just rumors swirling around, or you see one example, and we have statewide data, we have regional data, and we don't really have local data.
Yeah.
So.
To me, it's just sad that you hear that different counties, even the police cars bring them here to drop them off, and you go to those towns and you don't see the problems there.
Yeah, and I hear that often. I want to see the evidence. I want to see, is that actually what's happening here? Because the studies that have been done have, again, there's a little bit of movement, but most people stay where they are.
Yeah, I actually had a city official state that he knows for a fact.
Yeah.
In other cities, the cops are bringing them here and leaving them.
You're saying a city official said that folks are bringing. I'm sick of excuses as well. It doesn't matter at a certain point what the causal factors are. We need to address it. And so it's frustrating to me that we would have city staff and say like, oh, these folks are just getting busted. It's like, do your job. Figure it out. Use resources better. Figure out who these folks are and who are our local folks or who are Solano County folks and what they need, and let's get them into housing. Or let's identify again the perpetrators of the crimes and the people that are danger, and let's get them, take care of that. That's what needs to be done. And it's hard to hear that again from your own government. Just like, oh, we're going to make an excuse and not address the real problem. And actually, that reminds me, there was a part of your question that I forgot to answer, which was coordination between cities. So that is also really important, and I'm really happy to have the support and endorsement of Benicia Mayor Steve Young and have good relationships with both of the candidates for mayor in American Canyon. I think we've got to be working really closely with both of those cities because, you know, one of the big controversial things that happened in Vallejo was a church in Benicia had a mobile showers that they wanted to put here. I think there's a lot of tension and frustration, and we need to be working with Benicia. We need to know what Benicia's dealing with, what they're doing, what we're doing, and it needs to be coordinated. And American Canyon as well, because those are our two closest geographic neighbors. Any other city, there's a geographic barrier for folks, but I think there is probably huge value in coordinating amongst Vallejo, Benicia, and American Canyon, at least to bring resources here and make sure that our projects, whatever we're doing, that we're coordinated in some way, so that we're not, you know, either duplicating efforts or accidentally, you know, doing something that's going to adversely impact our neighboring city, etc. I had Diane and then Tom.
Oh, okay, this is kind of a quick comment, which is that Solano County is the poorest county in the area. You have to pay a toll value around here.
Yeah.
Sacramento, or Sacramento. And I think for basically it's like kind of discrimination.
Absolutely.
And so many people are here, like myself, because they got turfed out, more expensive, more inner cities like, Berkeley, Oakland, San Francisco. And so they're commuting, like they make horrendous commutes, and they're taking those two tolls just to, one or two tolls. So, in this, can we work with this angle? Because Britain County is wealthy,
Yeah. The comment was about the equity in tolls, basically, and this is something that I feel really, really strongly about this because when I first moved to the Bay Area, the toll for the Bay Bridge was different from the tolls for the other bridges, and then I forget how many years ago because I've lost all sense of time from COVID. 5 or 6 years ago, or some indeterminate number of years ago, we passed the regional measure to increase the tolls for all the Bay Area bridges from $5 to $6 to $7, and I think it's about to go up to $8 and eventually $9.
Yeah.
I think we're on the path to get them all to $9, but it equalized it across all the bridges. That to me is extremely unfair because people that cross the Bay Bridge have a public transit alternative. People that cross the Carquinez Bridge and the Martinez-Benicia Bridge do not have a public transit alternative. And yes, and our community is lower income, but we don't have an alternative, and a lot of the toll funding goes into public transit, it goes into BART, it goes into stuff that we don't even use. And so you've got our residents, Solano County residents, paying the same toll that San Mateo County and Alameda County and San Francisco County people are paying, and Marin, and we don't have nearly the benefits, nor do we have the ability to pay those tolls. So I personally would like to see different tolls for different bridges again, and I would like to stop the increases for our county and certainly not have another toll for us on 37. It's incredibly unfair, and it just isolates us further from the rest of the region. It makes it harder for people to go who commute out to work. Yeah, huge issue. Go ahead.
Sorry if this also got covered before, but if it didn't, could you talk about the economics involved with the whole discussion about Ramona Bishop and her school downtown and what you think about that and what the city did and what she did and how that was supposed to have benefited the downtown? Could you talk about that?
The question was about the school downtown. This is a difficult one because now that it's under litigation, I was very careful with the issue because it looked like it was probably going to end up getting litigated, and because I'll have to be on council when it's litigated, and we need to have council members who can have the best interests of the city in mind in dealing with it. I don't want to make any comment one way or another that's going to force me to have to recuse or be biased in that. What I will say is that I think the way that was handled highlights some of the issues we have with openness and transparency and inclusion in Vallejo, because the way that it was brought to Planning Commission and then to City Council should never have been. That process never should have occurred. There was a zoning change that went through on a consent calendar in 2022 or 2021 that was never publicly brought forward. And then a lot of the pre-work, there was secrecy, and then it came to planning commission, and it ended up being this lightning rod, and there was no inclusion or honest discussion about it going forward, or going into the initial vote by planning commission. And as such, now we're embroiled. It reminds me of how the city bungled Orson, frankly, where you get in this situation where because the process was compromised, you end up risking litigation both ways and nobody wins. So now we're in a position where we might not even have anything in that building for years because it's just going to be tied up, and it's incredibly frustrating. So I know I can't fully answer your question because I'm really more concerned with I'm concerned with being able to do what I need to do to look out for the city's interests.
I guess what I want to know is that someone on the city council isn't going to put a school downtown, which doesn't bring anything to the downtown. I mean, can you talk about something you said in the past that would indicate that you don't believe the school should be downtown or should be?
I'll say two things because I do have comments on that. Yeah, the question was kind of just what do I feel about that, activating that part of downtown. So in the candidate forum we had in this very room, I mentioned that I support a downtown vacant property ordinance that would force some of the building owners who have these derelict buildings that aren't up to code to either get up to code or sell, so we can get tenants in those buildings. We actually have businesses that want to come here and business owners that want to expand, and we're never going to activate the downtown until we get people in those vacant buildings. That's one thing that I feel very strongly about and will champion. The other thing, and I remember when Slater and I first came to Vallejo, whatever it was, 8+ years ago, when we arrived, we lived on Georgia Street, and we said, why does the farmer's market end and there's 2 blocks and then there's a ferry terminal and a waterfront? There are 2 blocks between the ferry terminal and the start of downtown where Bambino's is, I guess it would be Sacramento Street, that aren't activated for economic development, and it completely cuts us off. We've got all those ferry riders that get off the ferry and walk to their car and don't walk through downtown, and we've got all the people downtown that now aren't accessing the waterfront. It's not just the farmer's market that I'm talking about, it's the entire way we think about those 2 blocks. When the city demolished, I was trying to think of a better word than demolished, when the post office that used to be there on Georgia Street was demolished, there were a couple of things that could have been done with that space. One of the things that could have been done with that space was a project called the Phase B parking garage, which sounds like a parking garage, but what it actually was a privately funded, mixed-use economic development project that would have had ground floor retail and market rate housing, to your point about low-income housing, market rate housing, and then parking in the middle, so it would have been an L at that corner of Santa Clara. I'm trying to remember, make sure I have the right streets. At the corner of Santa Clara and Georgia, the parking internally for the people that live there, and now you've got custom retail downtown on that block that didn't have anything. You've got market rate housing for people that can access the ferry and downtown, and now you're starting to bring people into that other rest of the stretch of Georgia Street. It was right there for us, and there were unfortunately leaders at the time that chose a different path. They decided that they wanted to try to get grant funding to do solely just a parking garage, and the grant was going to be $10 million, and the parking garage was going to cost $50 million, and it didn't pencil, and the whole thing fell apart, and now we've got a paved lot that I believe is an encampment currently. So I want to see stuff like that Phase B project there, because that's exactly what we need. We need mixed use, we need market rate housing, we need ground floor retail, stuff that's going to bring foot traffic, stuff that's going to connect the ferry, and then we activate the waterfront. We got, thankfully, some of the long-term leases for control over the waterfront just ended north and south of the ferry terminal, so both of those properties are up for potential development right now. Imagine if we can activate those, activate that post office site, and then connect that to downtown and start getting people in the downtown buildings. That's my vision. I think that kind of helps a little bit, at least to get a sense of what I'm looking for. I am laser focused on those 2 blocks, because that to me is just one of those unlocks for us, that you get a good path for people to walk, make sure it's safe, make sure it's lit, make sure it has activities, and start getting people moving between the ferry terminal and downtown. Yeah, I had Bobby and then, yeah.
I have a question for you, because this again goes back to the unhoused.
Yeah.
And this is something you might be able to talk with Chris, what's his name?
Cabalden.
In Sacramento, they have a similar situation when all the Air Force bases were closed. Okay, McClellan up there was one of them that was closed. They took the Barracks, and I know this from first-hand experience I had in an older son, drug addiction and so on, different story. But they took those Barracks and they converted them into small living units for people that had been through drug rehab, and they had young families, and they were brought in. They went through strict screening. There was a gate set up. Anyone coming to visit, so it wasn't free for all. They had to go through the guard gate. They had to go to the main office to get the pass to visit the people. The units were inspected daily. I mean daily.
Yeah.
They had mandatory drug meetings there, with mandatory drug testing, and if you didn't pass, you were kicked out.
Yeah.
Which that was the sad part of it. But again, those people
But
that have
supportive.
life to turn their lives around.
Right.
And if they were kicked out for abusing, then another they opened the window for somebody else to move in, and they just used
Yeah.
the Barracks.
You're talking about, like
Retrofitted
transitional
them.
supportive housing.
And why are we doing that with marijuana?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think now Mare Island at this point is privately owned, and
Oh.
we're in a bit of a different situation with Mare Island. There are some really cool examples of cities repurposing military bases. I know Concord's working on their naval weapons station. When I was down in San Diego, they have a place called Liberty Station that they just activated a former base. And there's ideas like you had. If you have those barracks, there was a program out of the state very similar that would have allowed us to purchase motels and convert them into affordable or transitional housing. That was actually the Project Homekey program that, for whatever reason, the city of Vallejo decided to build the Broadway project from scratch instead of buying motels that are already parceled out and already have everything that we needed. But I think there's, even if it's not, so that maybe that model isn't what we use, but I think there's models we can use in other cities. I was reading an article just the other day about a project in San Mateo where they actually have sort of shifted off of the idea of congregate living as the answer and more to a model of what you were just describing, where people can have privacy. If they have pets, they can have their pets there, and they can have a locked door that they can go into. And there was I think the project in San Mateo is they built little modular units, kind of like barracks, honestly, very similar. And it's cheaper or equivalent to some of the stuff we're already doing in Vallejo. But I think we need to explore those types of transitional programs. Yeah. I thought there was somebody else, and I mean Slater had something to add, and then we'll go to Owen. Oh no, then we'll go to Sherry Ann and then Owen. And then we had
I'm just reminding you.
Thank you. Yeah.
You talked about the waterfront a couple times now.
Yeah.
Sort of master planning or developing the waterfront now, and some of those properties that have been tied up for decades with Alcan and beyond. One of the big problems that we're still contending with is the Sperry Mill site. where
Yeah.
the proposed cement plant and rail operation is going to go. The proprietors of that business have been convicted of bribing public officials in San Francisco and served jail time in federal prison, and they continue to operate on the site without permits from the
Yeah.
city. And it's critical that we are going to develop our waterfront, whether it's Kiewit or the central or the north waterfront, that issue be resolved. And so can you talk a little bit about that, and then also
Yeah.
your sort of vision for the entirety of the waterfront?
Yeah, I've been really vocally opposed to the illegal operations on Sperry Mill. I've made multiple public comments on this. I was opposed to Orsum and glad that they pulled the project, but as you mentioned, the principals, Vallejo Marine Terminal, VMT, they've since changed their names, but these were the people that were bringing in Orsum. They have heavy machinery operating down there without a permit. There are email trails that have come out in PRA's public records requests that have shown that city staff, senior high-up city staff who are still with the city of Vallejo, were aware of this illegal operation and actually sort of winked the developer, hey, you might want to put your stuff away while we send code enforcement out. Right around that same time, the Public Works new roof scandal broke in San Francisco, where a bunch of people were indicted for bribing public officials and for taking bribes in San Francisco. 2 of the people who were indicted, found guilty, and did jail time in that scandal are the 2 principals of the Vallejo Marine Terminal, BMT, Bill Martin, and Alan Varela, who continue to control that property and continue to operate without a permit. Again, these are reasons why I ran for office, because I was sick of telling people, this is wrong, we need to do something, and nothing happens. And I've had conversations with multiple council members and leaders and said, we can't go on like this. This is unethical, it's unreasonable. We don't know if there was wrongdoing. We don't know if they bribed anybody in Vallejo, but we need to get them off the waterfront at least so that they're not operating illegally without a permit. The city's going after food vendors and people trying to get a new foundation on their homes and going after people for code enforcement, and they're letting these millionaire felons operate on the South Waterfront. It's special treatment for special interests, and it's why Vallejo is held back. So I'm very frustrated by it, and I'm excited to activate that part of the waterfront because, as I was mentioning earlier, we've got kind of a blank slate with the entire waterfront because there's been so much stagnation. If you can get Sperry Mill, that site's right next to Cal Maritime. Do something there that's complementary to Cal Maritime. There's the Kiowit, they're just doing lay down type of stuff. Maybe they can move somewhere else in the city. We can do something active with that area of the waterfront. You've got the part where the dentist office used to be right south of the ferry terminal. You've got the part where Joe Callahan used to have control north of the ferry terminal. We finally, after his benefactors got off city council, we finally got, not benefactors, his beneficiaries got off city council, the council members he had donated to. We finally got him off the north waterfront, and we can bring the new developer in. We've got the ability to really think holistically about the waterfront, bring in funding from the climate change bill to reinforce the seawall and get some movement there, get something really connected and holistic with each of those parcels. And it was funny you brought up Sperryville and Orsum because the questions that I just pulled are about environmental issues. So it's a perfect segue. The first question was, how can you balance stricter environmental regulations with economic growth? And then what steps will you take to enforce compliance with new regulations, especially for major polluters, such as factories in Vallejo? So I think this is a great segue into the topic of environmental justice, because I really firmly believe that we can grow Vallejo without damaging the environment. There's been enough damage done in our community, and there's enough environmental justice issues in our community already. Thankfully, we don't have a cement plant on the South Waterfront, but just the freeways alone, 37 going through North Vallejo and 80 going through South Vallejo, you've got higher rates of asthma, you've got disproportionately impacted communities, you've got communities that were broken up by those freeways, and it impacts home values, it impacts health outcomes. So when we're thinking about what to do with, for example, Sperry Mill and the fairgrounds, which is right up there by 37 in North Vallejo, we need to really think about how we not only avoid doing more damage to the environment, but how can we use these projects to undo some of the inequity and really provide people good opportunities, good access, make sure that these projects have open space, make sure that they go through full environmental review, and that there's community engagement in the process, kind of getting back to some of the topics we were talking about earlier with inclusion, just making sure that we're really doing it right. And it's hard with the state, compliance with new regulations, you're all good, in compliance with new regulations, I think that kind of comes back to the relationships with the state legislators as well. Is, you know, I would want to be in touch with our state senator and our state assembly member constantly to make sure that we have a good understanding of what regulations are in place and that we're enforcing them equally in Vallejo, and that if we need resources in order to enforce them, or we need resources in order to, like I said, you know, deal with the seawall or deal with other environmental issues, that we're able to bring those resources in from state and federal and get the support that we need. I learned just recently that there's and I'm gonna get it wrong if anybody can help me clarify, there's a company that makes cement, I think, on I want to say Broadway, that is operating without a permit.
Ground materials.
Is that what it is? Ground materials. Yeah, I mean, there are companies that are operating without permits in Vallejo and that are doing environmental damage. So this is, I mean, we've got to enforce what we have now, and I do think we can do it. I think there's a way to grow in a way that's thoughtful and inclusive, and that it ensures that we maybe address some of the equity issues we already have. The other question here is, do you think we have too many closed session meetings? I think we have too much getting thrown at city council in the first place. I think, you know, one of my goals is to make city council meetings boring again. We need the city to function in a way that we don't have to have these big ticket items keep having to come up. But there are reasons why things are in closed session. There are things that are confidential, or, you know, in the process of negotiation, and legally can't go in front of the public until the decision has been made. And I think this is a really great point to close on, because it gets to the choice that we have to make in the mayor's race. Oh, and I'll get Owen's question too. But the choice that we have to make in the mayor's race. Some of the most important and consequential decisions that affect our community happen in closed session. Money is moved, land is sold, Blue Rock Springs is sold, North Mare Island is sold for pennies on the dollar, and the developers get these great deals. Union contracts are negotiated. Drug testing is taken out of the police VPOA contract, which was just something that I opposed very, very strongly. These things happen behind closed doors. So we need leaders that we can trust to make the right decision and to represent us when no one's watching. Not just people that are going to pay lip service when everybody's, when they're at the dais on the mic and say, yeah, I care about this, I care about equity, I care about this part of our community or about the environment, but that are going to go behind closed doors when no one's watching them, when no one's there to hold them accountable, and fight for us, the people in our community. And that's been the problem in Vallejo. Since I've been here and since before I've been here, is we have had city council members that get behind closed doors and do the bidding of their donors, do the bidding of their financiers, their developers, the property owners, the PACs, the special interests that have funded them, and there's no way for us to stop them because they're doing it when we can't even watch. And when they do it in open session, sometimes they also vote against what we want. So I'm not taking a dime from PACs, from developers, from big corporations, from any of those special interests, and I'm going to fight for the community at every single opportunity. That's what's at stake here, I think, is having the transparency and the open government, yes, the inclusion, yes, but also leadership you can trust when you can't be there in the room with them, that will be fighting for you. So I'll end there and I'll take Owen's question. We'll do both. Go ahead, Owen.
Yes. I was wondering what interest you had in rent control.
Oh, yeah.
To curb the rate at which people become homeless.
Yes.
And to give the community more discretionary income to support the local economy with.
This question's about rent control. This is a really good one because this is my economics professor. I'm covering this in my classes in the next couple weeks. I am, in general, the way to address the housing crisis, economics-wise, the way to address the housing crisis is to build more housing. That is the only way we are going to get out of this situation. It's the only way we're going to bring prices down. You just build more housing. The issue with rent control is it doesn't actually address the root cause. So rent control can help renters in the short term, but it doesn't address the root cause of the housing affordability and the shortage of housing. And sometimes it can make it worse. So the vision that I have for Vallejo specifically, I want to build as much more housing as we can, thoughtfully, throughout the city, making sure we're going through environmental review, but we need to build. We have rent control, statewide rent control currently. Rent increases are capped at 5% plus inflation annually for anybody except for mom and pop landlords. There's some exceptions, but we need to make sure that's getting enforced because we do have rent control in Vallejo right now. And I do fully support, and I said this at the candidate forum a couple weeks ago, I fully support tenant protections because we do need to address the root causes of homelessness. And that includes things like just cause eviction statutes, that includes things like a rental registry where some of the more predatory landlords can have their behavior recorded, and a way for residents to complain, to make complaints about their landlords and ensure that there's follow-up if they're not complying with the law. Because we do have some corporate landlords in Vallejo that I have heard just out in the community, even before I was running for office, that I've heard horror stories about. And so we need to address those things. And we need to make sure that people have jobs here, and that gets back to economic development because you've got, the best insurance we can have against people becoming homeless is to try to make sure that they have access to economic opportunities, that they have access to affordable housing, especially our seniors that are on fixed income, but also that our young people have access to the jobs that will pay them enough to be able to afford housing here. So that's, all right, we've got to be out of this room by 5. I want to take one more question because you just walked in and I want to hear what you have to say, and then we'll go. I appreciate everybody's time.
Did I understand you say that rent control can sometimes make the homeless problem worse?
I don't know about making the homeless problem worse, but it can make the housing, it can make the shortage of housing worse. Because if the rent is controlled on a building, then it may, I'm trying to think about the way, I'm thinking about how I would teach this in my class. It might disincentivize someone from renting a building. It might disincentivize someone from renting a building. Yeah.
Okay, just be aware of the time.
We are.
5 minutes. We got it.
We are all good. We've got you. No worries. So, for example, if you have like a big apartment building, let's say, and the owner of that building is frustrated with the rent control, and they might convert it to condos and take it off the rental market so it's not subject to rent control. Things like that would be the worry. The main issue, though, is I would personally rather just build more housing so that people have access to housing, and we keep prices down that way. We keep rents down that way. Does that make sense? Do you want to ask a follow-up or anything?
I still really don't understand. If someone is looking at a rent control house, they're going to convert their other property into condos?
That's the fear. That's the worry.
It's happened a lot.
It's happened in San Francisco. So it's really, really good for the people that have the rent-controlled apartments, but there's usually not enough apartments, is the problem. So you need to still build. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is you still need to be building more units. Yeah. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. This is quite lovely. We'll do more of this.